In America, we spend about $30 billion a year on vitamins and supplements. Now, that may sound like a lot. It would be a lot if I was, if I could recoup that, I could live quite handsomely on $30 billion a year. All of us could. But it's only about 1% of the total expenditure in health care in this country. So not everyone in America takes supplements. Only about 70 million people do that. The question is that money well spent? And that's an important discussion, and we're going to address some of that tonight. Someone already asked me, are we going to talk about probiotics tonight? Unfortunately, I don't have enough time, but if there's enough interest, we can do that another time. In fact, sometimes I think maybe we've talked about everything that anyone's interested in over the years, and I run out of things to think about, to lecture on. So if anyone has an interest, please write it down on a piece of paper, any health topic that you're interested in, and if we get enough interest on any one topic, I'm certainly happy to do that or repeat a lecture that I've given in the past. Sometimes my wife and I and Cheryl get together and we think, well, what are we going to talk about now? And so any time that you have an interest, please let us know. I'm really glad there are greens in this Mongolian hot pot, because if you take away nothing else from tonight, what I want you to think about is greens instead of supplements. And I think you'll see that. I thought we'd just start talking about vitamins, some of the more common ones, and the ones that people take anyway, and the risks and benefits of supplementing those. Folic acid is the one on the top of your handout. And as you might guess, one of the number one sources of folic acid is green leafy vegetables. So you've had your folic acid for tonight because you've had it several different kinds of greens in that hot pot. If you don't have enough folic acid, those are the things on your handout that you have problems with, and it's number one, megaloblastic anemia. That just means the red blood cells are too big and you can't make enough of them. You can get that from B12 deficiency or folic acid deficiency, and we'll talk about B12 later. If you don't get enough folate, you have increased risk of cancer, and none of us want that, so we need to get enough. If you are thinking about getting pregnant, and it doesn't look like many of you here are going to be thinking about that, but you may have children or grandchildren that are thinking about getting pregnant. If they don't have enough folic acid in their bodies when they get pregnant, they're at much higher risk for having a child with a neural tube defect. That's the defect of the nervous system in its development. And that's a very serious developmental abnormality. Unfortunately, by the time most women figure out that they're pregnant, the neural tube is already developed. So taking prenatal vitamins is really, it's too late. The horse is out of the barn, so to speak. And what women should do is contemplate having a baby instead of just having it happen. Of course, that isn't always possible, but you need to keep your folate level up before you get pregnant to prevent those neural tube defects. And then you have an increased risk of high blood pressure if you don't have enough folate. So you certainly want to get enough folate, right? And many people are worried about getting enough folate, and so they take a pill. But is that going to help? Well, As I mentioned, prior to pregnancy, taking folate reduces the risk of neural tube defects, but not after you already know you're pregnant, unless you know in the first week. Then it helps some. Supplementation does not reduce cancer risk. Now that's, you say, wait a minute, you just said if the level's low, you're going to have a high risk of cancer, but taking a pill doesn't reduce it. I didn't make a typo, that's true. We know that if you take a folate supplement, your risk does not go down. Farther away? Okay, how about that? Is that better? All right, how about here? I got to get it right. Okay, all right, is that better? All right, so we know that if you don't have enough folate in your diet, your risk of cancer goes up, but taking a pill does not lower your risk of cancer. In fact, some studies suggest that you have an increased risk of cancer of the colon when you supplement. Now that's really interesting, isn't it? But this is a theme that you will see throughout tonight's lecture. If you get the vitamin in your food, your risk goes down, and if you take it in a pill, your risk goes up. And we'll discuss some of why that is in a minute. All right. The other thing is we know that if you get too much folic acid in a supplement, you actually have an increased risk of peripheral neuropathy. And that's only twice the recommended dose if you take it as a supplement. Now, if you take it in your greens and you eat twice the recommended amount of greens, which I don't think you could, but if you did, you wouldn't have that problem, only when you take it as a supplement. You see, when we absorb vitamins from greens, we get a balance of vitamins. You'll see there are many different vitamins in greens, and that's not necessarily so when you get it in a pill. Who decides what the balance of vitamins are in a pill? Does nature? No. The pharmaceutical company. But you know, the interesting thing is this. There's very poor correlation between what the label says is in the pill and what is actually in the pill in independent analysis. And so remember, the FDA does not control supplements. No, there's no oversight of that. And so what's actually in there and what's on the label may or may not correlate. That's one of the other problems with this. The other thing is we don't want to get megaloblastic anemia, but it's exceedingly rare to get it from a folic acid deficiency, because folate is found in so many things. Green leafy vegetables, fruit, oranges are actually quite high in folic acid. Cereals, grains, nuts. If you eat a diet that has variety, there's no way that you're going to be deficient in folic acid. So I don't recommend supplementing it because it doesn't work as well to supplement. There are risks with supplementation, and there's certainly something in that list of sources that you like, right? Okay, let's go to vitamin C. Vitamin C is, you've heard of limeys, right? They're the British sailors, and they found out before they knew what vitamin C was that if the British sailors ate limes, they wouldn't get scurvy. And scurvy is a really bad disease where your teeth fall out and your muscles grow weak, and it's just a really bad disease. And so if they gave them limes, they didn't get it. They could have also given them potatoes. Potatoes have vitamin C in them. Peppers actually have more than citrus. this list is roughly in concentration. So peppers, black currants, parsley, kale, kiwis, broccoli, Brussels sprouts all have more than lemons do as far as vitamin C. So there you have all of those greens. They have more vitamin C than lemons do. Although lemons and oranges and citrus, they do have vitamin C in them. You probably didn't think of sweet peppers as being one of the richest sources of vitamin C, but they are. And so eat those for your vitamin C. Great source. If you have a deficiency, you get scurvy. I've already talked about that. What about cancer and vitamin C? Well, interestingly, your body doesn't absorb and keep vitamin C unless the total intake is 200 milligrams or less. If you have 1,000 milligrams or 10,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day, your body absorbs it and immediately dumps it into the urine. Now, we use this medically in people that have problems with recurrent urinary tract infections. It's not a vitamin effect of vitamin C, but it's the fact that vitamin C is what? Ascorbic acid. And it acidifies the urine. And most of the bacteria that cause urinary tract infections don't like an acid environment. So if you acidify the urine by taking high doses of vitamin C, you reduce the risk of a urinary tract infection. But you don't get benefit from vitamin C orally more than 200 milligrams a day. Linus Pauling, you've heard about, and he did research on vitamin C and cancer and found that it was very effective in his research against cancer. No one has ever been able to reproduce his work. Maybe because no one's ever tested it against IV vitamin C. You can get super high doses of vitamin C in the blood if you give it IV. And that's what Pauling did. So the jury is still out on whether vitamin C is actually effective against cancer or not when given IV. But we know it's not effective against cancer when given in massive doses orally. And so taking huge doses of vitamin C do not help to prevent cancer. There are quite a few studies that show that yes, your risk of getting a cold is reduced slightly if you take excess vitamin C. Well, why is that? Probably because most of the vitamin C today is chewable, and people do that and they acidify the mouth. And viruses and bacteria don't like acid environments generally. But if you chew that stuff, remember it's an acid and it's hard on the enamel in your teeth. And so you're better to get your vitamin C in your peppers and your kale and your collards and parsley and black currants. And you can easily get enough vitamin C if you have 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. You get more than you easily get the 200 milligrams that your body will actually absorb and hold on to. So I don't think you have to supplement vitamin C. The downside of supplementing it is you can double your risk of kidney stones because you excrete all the excess into your urine, and that makes it more easy for you to form kidney stones. So, you know, maybe you won't have a urine infection when you get the kidney stone, but that's not much comfort. Let's look at vitamin E next. Vitamin E, there's sources that are rich in that, and that's sunflower seeds, wheat germ, corn, nuts, deep green leafy vegetables. There it is again, right? So the first 3 we find you've already gotten a good dose of those just from eating your dish tonight. Green leafy vegetables and avocado, those are all good sources of vitamin E. Now, vitamin E is interesting. It comes in 8 different forms. And when you take vitamin E in a pill form, are you getting all 8? No. And maybe you need all 8. Well, you do. And if you don't get a balanced intake, if they're not all 8 in your vitamin pill when you take it, guess what? That interferes with the absorption of the other 7. And so we find that people that have high levels of vitamin E in their diet have lower risk of cancer, but if you supplement vitamin E, your risk of cancer actually goes up. If you have greater than 400 international units of vitamin E supplemented a day, and many vitamin E pills contain more than that, mortality, gentlemen, from prostate cancer is increased. So you're taking that vitamin E and you're increasing your risk of death. That doesn't sound like a wise expenditure of money, does it? No, especially when I can tell you that seeds like flax seeds contain vitamin E, all 8 different forms, and we know that flax seeds will reduce your risk of prostate cancer and reduce a woman's risk of breast cancer as well. So there is no apparent benefit on reduction of cancer or cardiovascular disease or infection when you supplement vitamin E, and I don't recommend it for that reason. I think it's throwing your money down a rat hole, so to speak. All right, vitamin A and carotenoids. This is interesting. We know from studies done back in the 70s and 80s that the higher your blood level of the beta-carotene, vitamin A, and other carotenoids is, if you get it in your diet, the lower your risk of chronic disease, particularly of cancer. And so finding this out, they did a study in Finland that was published in the 90s in the New England Journal of Medicine, and they wanted to know if they took people that were really high risk for cancer, if they could lower their risk of cancer by giving them a supplement. So they gave them vitamin A, beta-carotene, they also gave some vitamin E, and wanted to know what would happen to these smokers who were very high risk for cancer. Study was done in Finland, and they found that the people that were supplemented with these things had higher risk of developing cancer. And they thought, well, now that's strange. Let's go back and do a subgroup analysis. That is, let's look at a small group of people, and what they found is those with the highest levels of the beta-carotene and vitamin A in their blood before they started supplementing had the lowest risk of cancer. Now that's counterintuitive at first, but remember they found the exact same thing with folic acid that I already talked to you about. If you get the vitamin in your food, lower risk of cancer. If you get it in a pill, higher risk of cancer. And you start saying to yourself, now wait a minute here. Maybe there's something to the way our food was designed that it's really good for us. And maybe when we muck it up and put it in a pill, it's not so good for us. And that's exactly what we find. That if you get your vitamins in their natural form, they're really better for you. And they're not harmful, they're helpful, whereas often if you get them in a pill form, you have problems. So sources of vitamin A and carotenoids, remember there are 500 different types of carotenoids, and if you take excessive amounts of one, you interfere with the absorption of the other 499. And we think that that's part of the reason why cancer rates go up with supplementing carotenes, because you don't have 499 different types in your pill, I can guarantee it. That would not be financially lucrative. But you get all those types when you eat food. You don't want to get deficiency in vitamin A. It's very rare in people that eat regular food, but if you got it, you get night blindness, dry eyes, and problems with your skin. It's very rare, but you can do it if you... I have a friend who's a nutritionist, and he's seen one case of vitamin A deficiency in this country. It was in a child whose parents weren't very good at controlling his diet, and the only thing he liked to eat was Sprite. And so for a year, that's all they gave this kid to eat was Sprite. Well, you can imagine that he'd become vitamin deficient. But what he needed was not a vitamin pill, but food, right? I had a cartoon in my office for a while. It showed a picture of a lady, and she said, I've decided to try a new supplement, food. And I certainly would recommend that. Supplementation, as I alluded to early, increases the risk of prostate cancer and lung cancer in those who took supplements. It increased the risk of osteopenia and fracture in those taking supplements, and in those with high dietary intakes of preformed vitamin A. Sources of preformed vitamin A include liver, milk, egg yolk, and butter. So fracture risk actually went up when you ate those sources of vitamin A, preformed vitamin A, versus eating the carotenes or carotenoids. You know, the more I go down this list, the less I want to take that vitamin pill in the morning. And isn't that what you're hearing too? All right, there are two vitamins that I'd like to cover now that are a little different. One is vitamin D, and the other one is vitamin B12. First of all, vitamin D is not a vitamin. It's misnamed. Vitamin D is a hormone. A hormone is a biologically active compound, usually based on cholesterol as the building block that the body makes it out of. So vitamin D is a hormone, not a vitamin. What do we know about hormones? They're good, right? But too much of it is bad. And that's true with any hormone that we know of. Cortisol is a hormone. If you don't have it, you die. If you get too much of it, you got a disease. Estrogen is a hormone. If you don't have it, you lose your womanhood. And if you have too much of it, you got high risk for cancer. Testosterone, the same. You name the hormone, the body controls it in a really tight range for optimum health. It makes sense that vitamin D would be the same, right? That the body would control that in a really tight range. But how do we make vitamin D? We don't have a gland that makes it. We have an organ that does, and that organ is the skin. And we make vitamin D when we get sun exposure. But sun exposure causes problems, right? Yeah, it does. It causes us to get wrinkles. And it causes us to get skin cancer. And so a lot of people, taking their cue from dermatologists, have started using sunscreens and have started avoiding the sun. I just read an article in preparation for this, and I gave you just a clip from that somewhere here. Lindquist in 2016 wrote a review on vitamin D and sunlight, and he said this: inadequate sun exposure was a risk factor for all-cause death of the same magnitude as smoking. Do you want me to repeat that, or do you want to just read it there? I mean, that's frightening, isn't it? Inadequate sun exposure is a risk factor for premature death equivalent to smoking. You know, it's interesting, people that get skin cancer, the basal cell and the squamous cell type, are at lower risk for internal cancer. Yeah, so You know, when you get a skin cancer, think about that. The other thing that's interesting is vitamin D does not lower cardiovascular risk. Doesn't lower your blood pressure. It doesn't lower your risk of heart attack and stroke. But sunshine does. Sunshine does. And it's really interesting now. Now we're back to the greens. Aren't you glad we ate some greens? When you eat greens, you absorb chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is what plants use to generate energy and grow, right? It's very similar actually to hemoglobin in its construction, which is fascinating. And we used to think, well, chlorophyll, that's for plants, it doesn't do us any good. Actually, it does. When you eat green, deep green leafy vegetables, you absorb the chlorophyll, and in the presence of sunlight, chlorophyll becomes activated. And you produce more nitric oxide. What does nitric oxide do? Drops your blood pressure. So I talked, when we talked about high blood pressure, about the importance of eating greens for nitric oxide, but I didn't tell you, I also mentioned sunlight, but I didn't link the two. What you really need to do is either go out in the sunlight in the garden and pick your greens and then bring them home and cook them and eat them, or you need to eat those greens and then look for a sunny spot, because sunshine drops your blood pressure, drops your risk for heart disease, drops your risk of stroke. And so I don't want you to think, well, I'll take my vitamin D and I'll stay out of the sun and I'll look beautiful a long time. You may look beautiful, but you might look beautiful in the casket. And that's not really what you want. Vitamin D is really important, particularly in this northern climate. Why? Because you don't get enough sunlight because of the angle of the sun from about November 7 through February 7 to make vitamin D. And a lot of us aren't going to go out in February, on February 8 and lay out and get sun, right? We're pretty covered up. And so until March or maybe April, we're not getting a whole lot of sun exposure. Although if you expose your face to the sun, you make quite a bit of vitamin D. If you go out in shorts and a short sleeve shirt and have fairly light skin and get a minimal erythemal dose of sun that for someone with my skin tone takes about 20 minutes, you make 20 to 30,000 international units of vitamin D. And that's a lot. Yeah. I'm not downplaying the necessity of vitamin D, because if you don't get enough, you get rickets or osteomalacia or muscle weakness. I had a welder in my office last year, and he came in, he said, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I can no longer squeeze my welding, the holding device that holds the rod enough to get the rod in it. And this is a big burly guy, and he's so weak he can't put the rod in his welder. Well, his vitamin D level was 4. And that's really low. You want a minimum of 20 nanograms per milliliter of vitamin D. So you need to make sure it's up there. And I said, next summer, get out, and this was in the fall, next summer, get out and then get some sunshine. Don't get a burn, because burns are not good for us, but get some sunshine. But that won't work now. You've got to take vitamin D. And so I put him on 50,000 international units of vitamin D a week for 6 weeks. He came back and he said, I can weld again. And he, every time I see him, I check his grip. And he's got a good rugged grip now, and that's what vitamin D will do. If you're elderly and you're at high risk for falls, one of the reasons is muscle weakness. One of the reasons of muscle weakness is inadequate vitamin D. So I think that supplementing vitamin D in the winter here in the northern climates is really important. But I don't want to say just take your vitamin D and stay out of the sun, because sunshine does other things that vitamin D supplementation does not do. The other thing that you can do if you're really against vitamins is you can just head south and take a vacation in the sun. I mean, think about how many units you could get if you went down there. Don't get a burn. You got to go out the first day for just a little while, and the second day a little while, third day a little more. You might need to stay for, you know, a couple of weeks or maybe a month. Does anyone want a script? I can send you down. So you can get your vitamin D, but you may have to go south to get it, or you can take a pill. And my wife and I are not pill takers, but I just want to let everybody know that we had our vitamin D this morning because it looked to me like a dark day out there, and I knew I wasn't going to get any sunshine. Think about your vitamin D. Be careful, because vitamin D can cause hypercalcemia, can cause an increased risk of kidney stones. It's probably best to have your vitamin D level measured if you're going to take more than 1,000 international units a day. If you think, oh, I've got to have more, well, get your level measured first, because, like I said, too much may cause problems. How much is too much? We don't know yet. They've raised normal levels recently, but remember, normal levels are low. What we're really saying is we've raised recommended levels, and we're not sure yet if they're right. I would say, by all means, keep your level, your vitamin D level, above 20 nanograms per milliliter. Maybe above 30, but I would not recommend you supplement until your level is above 40. Some people think, well, a little's good, a lot's better, and I've seen people with levels in the 60s, 80s, 90s. We don't have the data to show that that's good, and we don't have the data to show there's any benefit from it, and there may be harm. I just caution you to remember vitamin D is a hormone. Yeah. So, question.
Is there some relationship between vitamin D and K?
Is there a relationship between vitamin D and vitamin K? Yes. It's not a tight relationship. I don't have vitamin K on this list, but guess where you get it? Greens. Oh yeah, you're catching on, greens. All right. So now let's go to vitamin B12, and our time is getting away from us. So after this, I'll just open it up for questions. Vitamin B12. Suboptimal B12 level is most commonly caused by poor absorption and inadequate intake. If you have normal absorption and reabsorption of B12, it will take, and you have zero intake of B12, it will take 30 years or more for you to become deficient. Okay? But there is a substantial portion of our population that does not have normal reabsorption of B12. It's about 5 to 10%. That's substantial. And if they don't have a definite source of B12 in their diet, they will become deficient in B12. So if you are a strict plant-based eater, either get your vitamin B12 level measured periodically or take a supplement. How much is the recommended daily allowance? 4 micrograms a day. What's the average supplement? About 500 to 1,000 micrograms a day. And so my wife and I occasionally take B12 supplements, maybe once every 2 weeks or 3, or when we think about it. You can get them online very inexpensively. The one we have is 2,500 micrograms. That's a huge amount. Fortunately, B12 is water soluble, and if you get more than you need orally, you just urinate it out. No problem. If you get B12 shots, you can get toxicity from B12. So never take B12 shots unless you're known to have B12 deficiency, and that requires a blood test. It used to be we couldn't do blood tests and we just kind of guessed about it when you got all the side effects. Remember, deficiency, there's the word again, megaloblastic anemia. Both B12 and folate deficiency cause that, as well as neuropathy and dementia. And if you don't get your level measured and you don't have a source, by the time you figure out you have B12 deficiency, you probably won't remember to take your vitamin. So that's no good.
What does that word mean?
Megaloblastic?
Yeah, what is that?
Okay, mega is big, and blastic is formation. Basically what they are is large red cells. If you look at the size of the red cells on a blood smear, they're a lot larger than they should be. But the frightening thing is not the anemia, which is easily reversible, but the dementia, which doesn't always reverse. It's somewhat reversible in the early stages, it is, but if it goes on for long enough, you have problems. And you also develop peripheral neuropathies. You lose vibration sense in your feet and position sense, which means you walk with a wide gait and you fall over more easily. And anytime I see someone with decreased sensation in their feet, I always measure a B12 level. And I would say I probably find a B12 deficiency 4 or 5 times a year. So it's not that uncommon. And it's something that you want to definitely be aware of, particularly on a vegan diet, because there are no natural sources of B12 in a vegan diet. Now wait a minute. A cow's on a vegan diet and they get plenty of B12. How do they do it? Well, they eat grass, and when they do, they pull up some dirt with it, and dirt is loaded with bacteria, and it's the bacteria that produce B12. And if none of us brushed our teeth, we would have adequate B12 probably from all the bacteria. And brushing the teeth is a relatively recent invention. And if we didn't eat sugar, we probably wouldn't need to brush our teeth. There are many cultures that didn't have toothbrushes and their teeth are great until they get exposed to sugar, because sugar impairs blood flow and it also impairs the flow of nutrients to the enamel to keep it in good shape. So cavities is not because of a deficiency of toothbrushes, but an excess of sugar. But I'm not going to recommend that you stop brushing your teeth. I think it's simpler to take a B12 supplement occasionally. Now, you don't have to take a supplement if you have a food source that has it in it. And most nut milks or soy milks have B12 in them. And many cereals are fortified with B12. I would just recommend that if you're on a strict plant-based diet, that you have some source of B12 or get your blood level measured. Remember, 30 years till you become deficient if you have a normal reabsorption. So recommendations: dark green leafy vegetables daily. Eat colorful fruit and vegetables every day. Eat the rainbow. Why? Because nutrition, vitamins, follow color. So eat colorful foods. Whole grains and seeds. That's where you get all your B vitamins. I didn't cover B1, B2, B6, B5, all of those, but they're mostly found in grains, whole grains. And we can talk about those if you wish. If you're a vegan, take a B12 supplement or get your blood level measured. Take vitamin D during the winter months, about 1,000 international units daily. Get as much sun as possible, but don't get a sunburn. And if in doubt, get your vitamin D level measured. Any questions? Yes?
I am vegan, as you know, and I stopped taking the calcium supplements.
Okay, so she's vegan and stopped taking calcium.
Right, but the question I have, and I think I know the answer, I am drinking the pea milk PPA milk
Yeah.
that is supplemented with 350 IU of the calcium. Is that
Okay, so she says that she's drinking P, as in PEA milk, and it's supplemented with calcium. I don't mind a small dose of calcium supplementation, but I would recommend that you look at your diet roughly and see how much you're getting. And I wouldn't recommend supplementing or having that milk with added calcium if your level is over 1,200 milligrams of calcium a day. The problem is many people were supplementing with high doses of calcium and were already getting adequate, meeting their RDA in their diet. So they were getting like twice or 3 times the amount of calcium that you need in a diet, and that's when the risk of coronary artery disease or atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, goes up with excess calcium. You still need calcium, and where's a good source? Deep, green, leafy vegetables. Yeah, great. Other questions? Yes, in the back. Is nutritional yeast a source of vitamin B12? They have vitamin B12 analogs in it that actually interfere somewhat with the absorption of B12 unless it's added to it. And some of the nutritional yeast has it added, but I wouldn't use it as a source. Cheryl. Okay, Red Star brand has B12 added, so that's an adequate source. Question?
Is there any difference in taking a supplement and then for having food where something's added? Isn't that still a supplement?
Yes, and I specified only B12, not the others. I would not take foods that have other things added to them. And the reason I mentioned about calcium, that's a mineral, not a vitamin, but excess minerals aren't good either. I would not supplement calcium if you're getting adequate calcium in your diet. And adequate calcium for a vegetarian, a vegan, is actually lower than a person on a standard American diet, because osteoporosis is what we're really talking about, and that's more of a problem with a high protein intake, particularly animal protein, which is more acidifying, and you have to buffer your urine with calcium so that it doesn't burn too much, and that's what your body does, and it buffers that urine with calcium. And if you're doing that from a high protein intake, you need about 1 milligram of calcium per gram of protein consumed per day on a standard American diet. So you're losing quite a bit in your urine. Does that help? Okay, in the back.
Where does magnesium fit? Can you read about magnesium?
Yeah, it fits in whole grains. You get magnesium in those. It's really good. And nuts as well. Magnesium, sometimes I supplement that, but only if I have a problem that I'm treating. And so it's not really a supplement, I'm treating a disease state. And with that, you need to be careful, simply because if you get too much, you'll get diarrhea. Yeah. Question?
Some vitamins are fat soluble. Can you contrast those?
Yes, the fat soluble vitamins are vitamin A, D, E, and K. Those are the fat soluble. The others are water soluble, and we used to think, well, supplementing the fat soluble ones are the only ones we really need to be careful with because we store those in the fat. But as you notice, B vitamins and others that are water soluble and excreted rapidly in the urine can still cause a problem if you get too much of them. And in the supplemental form, they're not as helpful as if you get them in the food itself. Yeah. Question in the back.
If you're on an acid reduction medication like Prilosec, does that alter the digestive process?
Yes, if you're on an acid suppressant like Prilosec or there are a whole bunch of them, famotidine, ranitidine, cimetidine, those are the H2 blockers, or I can't remember the brand names anymore, pantoprazole or isoprazole, they all end in prazole. Those are the acid suppressors. They will interfere with the absorption of B12. You need an acid stomach. The other thing is so many people are on those now. Acid is supposed to be in the stomach. It kills bacteria. Have you ever heard of small bowel overgrowth? Maldigestion, irritable bowel, a lot of that is inadequate acid in the stomach. You say, well, wait a minute. I take those acid suppressants because my stomach's so upset. Well, yeah, but what's the problem? The problem is you have gastric acid reflux and you're getting acid up in the esophagus, and maybe you need to look at your diet and change some things so that that doesn't happen. That's a real problem, but the answer is not always take an acid suppressant. The answer is, why are you having it? Maybe you're consuming caffeine. No one does that here, right? Or maybe it's chocolate. Chocolate's a great source of antioxidants, but it also causes gastric reflux. Yeah, it really does. Caffeine's a great way to do that, and so is chocolate. So is mint. Peppermint will, why do you give it to babies with colic? So they can belch, right? It lowers the pressure of the lower esophageal sphincter. And so does frequent eating. And on it goes. So the first question to ask yourself if you have acid reflux is not what medicine should I take, but what do I need to do differently with my diet to fix this problem so I don't need a medicine that reduces the acid in the stomach, which is a really good thing because you need acid there. If you don't, you're going to have a higher risk of pneumonia, you're going to have a higher risk of infection and maldigestion, B12 deficiency, and on it goes. So we're creating problems. The nice thing about medicine that I practice is if I give you enough drugs, I can create new problems to treat. And it's sort of ongoing, and that's nice too. Well, no, it isn't. Question?
Well, it's more of a comment. I found if I eat early in the evening, I don't get acid reflux.
Right. Yeah, you know, eating early is really important. If you're having a problem with weight, I just saw this research out, although it's something my wife and I have recommended that people do for a long time. If you eat, let's say you have 2,000 calories you're going to eat a day. If you spread them over 3 meals, you gain weight. If you do it over 2 meals, breakfast and lunch, you'll lose weight. Same amount of calories, but restrict the amount of time you eat. One you lose, one you gain. Interesting.
Say that again.
Yeah, okay, here it is again. If you take X amount of calories and you divide them up into 3 groups, and you eat some for breakfast, some for lunch, some for supper, you can gain weight on that. Take the same amount of calories, divide it into 2, eat half for breakfast, half for lunch, you'll lose weight. Yeah, I don't recommend supper if you're going to skip a meal. It shouldn't be breakfast, it should be supper because of acid reflux and because of diabetes and because of colon cancer. We know that the longer the rest time that you give your GI tract every day, the better your health is. Lower cancer rates, lower diabetes rates, lower acid reflux rates, and better sleep.
What about fasting? I hear that's...
I didn't catch it. What about fasting? Okay, what about fasting? Not for skinny people. I don't overdo it. I don't want you to be too thin. But there's a lot of information on fasting. What I recommend if you're going to do fasting, make sure your weight's normal. And fast by eating 2 meals a day, breakfast and lunch. And maybe 1 day a week, have breakfast only. There's really good research on fasting and helping, unless you take it too far. And then you get into trouble. You know, I love to eat. Don't you? I mean, good food, I just love to eat. And I don't like to forego pleasure unless it's really going to benefit me. But when my wife and I sit down to eat, I like to eat a good full meal. I don't like to get up from the meal feeling hungry. And I find that we do best if we have a good solid breakfast and a good lunch, and occasionally we'll have a piece of fruit for supper. Or if we have guests over, we'll eat more for supper and love it, because I love to eat. But, you know, not on a daily basis. On the weekends, we'll often have guests over and have a supper meal, and it's just really great. But through the week, it's usually 2 meals a day. I had a good breakfast this morning. I ate lunch at about 1 o'clock, and that was it. Oh, I had a tangerine just after I finished my office today. But that's all. And I'm not underweight, and I'm not out of energy yet. I'll get there. But one more question. Yeah, you.
Back on vitamin D,
Yeah.
I've always been curious if you're between the sun, if there's a glass between you and the sun, does that do anything for the vitamin D?
It reduces your vitamin D production. Yeah,
But there is some.
a little bit. Unless it's glass that's tinted, and then you don't get as much. One more, and then we'll let you all go home, and anyone that wants to stay after, I'll answer.
I'll just tag on to that. So what about sunscreen? Is that just mean?
Sunscreen reduces your risk, your development of vitamin D as well. What you really need is to go outside, expose the skin. You know, I want to come up with a new style. Backless dresses and backless shirts. Okay? And because you're bent over outside gardening and whatnot, so you expose your back, and then no one else, I mean, when you go around, you get cancer, and no one's going to see it's on your back, right? So it's not a problem. So that's someone needs to come up with a new design, backless shirts and, well, you know, a big hole in it or something. But you need to expose skin, and then after you get that minimal erythemal dose, and that's different for everybody, the darker your skin, the longer it takes. But you want to stop short of a sunburn, and after you get that, cover up. You don't have to run around half naked. Cover up. You want the sunshine, but then cover up. And expose areas of your body that haven't been sun damaged. And you know, that's the back and the upper arm and